About a year ago to the day, I was given a letter in the mail by BMW North America that there was a recall that had affected my F32 4 Series. Now, the specifics of that recall are pretty irrelevant to this story, but the reason I bring that up is because I scheduled an appointment today and went to go drop off my vehicle, was given the option of a loaner, and I said, sure, why not? Another BMW for the day, I get to make a video, let's see what they have for me. Well, I go to my friend behind the counter and lo and behold, they have two cars. They have a 228i and an M235i. To the more casual BMW enthusiast, typically when you hear 2 Series, you think rear-wheel drive, 4 or 6-cylinder, automatic or manual, generally a BMW. However, in 2019, BMW actually split the 2 Series for the next generation into 2 different models. One, continuing the F22 into the G42, continues on the rear-wheel drive, 6 or 4-cylinder, 2-door coupe. This, however, is the F22 2 Series Gran Coupe. Now, peeling back the layers a little bit, back in the early 2000s and technically late 90s, BMW had a lot of different passion projects on the mind, trying to expand the lineup a little bit, and at one point actually owned Land Rover. Land Rover ended up with a tandem project with the E53 X5S AV, kicking off a little bit of the luxury SUV craze, but they also acquired Mini. Now you might think, why would BMW acquire a more economical, more space, more budget-friendly focused brand? Well, if you know a little bit about their pedigree, not only did they crush it in motorsport like rallycross, they also had a performance division called JCW, or John Cooper Works, from one of their more famous drivers. So about 19 years later, BMW still owns Mini, and it was at this point where BMW was already making cars in tandem with some of their Mini counterparts. The X1, the X2, and in 2019, the 2 Series Gran Coupe joined the ranks. And so why am I bringing all of this up? If you take the classic BMW formula, driving characteristics and providing an engaging experience, hence the ultimate driving machine. So what happens when you turn all of that upside down? A transverse 4-cylinder mounted sideways, front-wheel drive biased all-wheel drive system. Sounds like BMW might have made the best Mini ever. So join me along the ride today as we go through this 2024 BMW M235i Gran Coupe. So I want to start this review talking about something a little bit controversial. I mentioned this car was introduced back in 2019, and remember what BMW was coming right off the heels of. 2019 marked the end of a lot of key models. The 6 Series is probably one of the most prominent, as it turned into the 6 Series Gran Turismo, as well as got replaced with the 8 Series. Speaking on the 8 Series, I'd be surprised if you mistook this for an 8 Series from afar. I'll be coming around a corner and I see this pulling out, and you know, the lights and the general shape of the bumper does look pretty 8 Series. I think in the back it looks a little bit more like a X6 with the very thin taillight, as well as the slightly more bulbous rear with the more hatchbacky style look. But overall, I definitely think the looks have aged fairly well from what I would consider a slightly more roundish BMW design. That was actually right when BMW had introduced, at the time, brand new M3 and M4, the G80 and the G82. And if you're a diehard enthusiast like me, you'll remember the exact moment where it divided the fan base straight in half. Some people absolutely hated it. The bucktooth front, the Mustang-looking rear 3/4 panels, the thought that this car wouldn't even come with a manual or that it would have the option of all-wheel drive. This could not be a real M car anymore. And the other half of those enthusiasts who absolutely loved it saw it as revolutionary rather than evolutionary. And just as we saw with the F10 M5, people grew into it. People started to love it, see what the platform had to offer. And here we are 6 years later, some people are considering it the best M3 and M4 ever. That's gonna always be a hot topic of debate for many enthusiasts, but the reason I bring that up is because of this behind me. There is very little debate on whether or not this is a true BMW. I think at the end of the day, BMW can truly be defined by a few key characteristics, and this just doesn't fit the bill of any of it. And so, while this might look like a BMW, underneath, there's very little BMW DNA left. And so now having a little bit more context behind this car, is this a good car? The very simple answer is yes. I can absolutely say yes. I had a blast driving it back from the dealership, and so that's what I'm going to try to share with you and explain why this is actually a pretty decent buy in 2025 as the new generation's rolling out for the 26 model year. So now that we've established that this is a Mini on the outside, let's see why it's a Mini on the inside. Underneath the hood, you will find the transversely mounted 4-cylinder turbo that I've already mentioned. And while that's not a bad thing, What really impacts the driving characteristics is the fact that it's mounted so far forward. BMW has always strived to get that 50-50 weight distribution, and one of the main ways they've done that is by putting the engine as far back and in the center of the car as possible. Right off the bat, you can see this engine is basically right in front of the passenger. And with a front-wheel drive bias car, you're going to get that understeer that you get in a lot of those types of vehicles. Now, BMW has great engineers, and they've thought about that. The car does have a Torsen mechanical limited slip differential in the front, as well as the optional adaptive suspension. This, in tandem with up to 50% of the power to the rear wheels, gets this car from 0 to 60 in 5.1 seconds. That figure mainly comes from 302 horsepower and 331 pound-feet of torque from this up-powered B48 engine. The standard B48 gets around 255 horsepower and I want to say around 285 pound-feet of torque. So this car gets about 50 horsepower and about 60 pound-feet of torque over the standard vehicle. Now, just because it's a Mini underneath doesn't mean it doesn't sound good. Let's get a couple sound clips of the intake and exhaust noises and see where that performance is. Now, moving on to the inside of the car, you'd be hard pressed to find anything in here that is Mini related. This comes at a time when BMW, I think, was on the top of their game at blending both practicality, luxury, as well as driver engagement. If you're familiar with the F chassis generations, like my F32 4 Series, I'm not the biggest fan of the quality. The layout is very basic and it leaves a little bit to be desired. Now, seeing as this is one of the more entry levels in BMW's lineup, one of the ways they kind of circumvent that is by offering a lot of different options as standard. When you go for the M235i, you get the Harmon Kardon as standard, you get adaptive headlights as standard, and I believe the comfort access as well. This car has Apple CarPlay and Android Auto on the iDrive 7 display, which is the upgraded 10-inch display over the standard. I believe the M235 got that as standard. If you do go for the 228, you will have to upgrade that in the premium package. This car also does have the premium package, which adds the heated steering wheel, heated seats, the M Sport seats, which adds the bolstering, as well as the ability to control that on the buttons. So you can control your side bolster as well as your back. Additionally, this car comes with all of your standard safety features: lane keep, blind spot, front as well as side collision. However, in particular with this car, it does not have the adaptive cruise, but I don't think in this generation you're missing much, as the adaptive cruise is only partially autonomous. You do have to keep your hand on the steering wheel. Only under about 10 miles an hour can you take your hands off the steering wheel. It wasn't until the Driving Assistant Professional came out, which I think on later models you could get. The way you differentiate that is you'll see some slits on the top of the steering wheel where there's some lights. That'll tell you when you can take your hands off or put them back on. So if you have that, great. It's a phenomenal system. If you don't, you're not missing much. You have your typical cruise control settings on your left, as well as your multimedia on the right. On that note, you actually have buttons. As I mentioned, this is one of my favorite iterations of interiors and iDrive because you have every single button. You don't have anything haptic. You do have a little bit of gloss black, but you've got all your radio presets. You've got all your climate controls. I've got everything here. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You know where everything is, and if you've been in a BMW prior to this, everything's in the same position, so it really, really helps out there. The heads-up display is okay. It's not the brightest. You don't get the most information, but because this is on iDrive 7 and not iDrive 7 Lite, you get the full digital display. You have a lot of configurability. You can see the maps, what song you're listening to, You can see Apple CarPlay directions, but you can't see the map itself. That's not something that you got until iDrive 8. So if you are holding out for something like that, including iDrive 8 and up, if that's something that you like, you'll actually have to go for the brand new 2026 2 Series, which is a completely new generation. On that note, in terms of interior space, it really doesn't feel small. Coming from a 1 Series and a 4 Series, it's a blend of both. I drove the G42 2 Series a couple of years back. Everything feels the same. It's the same seats, the same steering wheel. Really, the only difference is how the dashboard is laid out. In terms of where you're going to be spending as a driver most of the time, there's plenty of space up front. In the back, it's a little bit of a different situation. At 5'9", 5'9.5", it is a little bit cramped back there. You get 2 USB-C chargers, but it's pretty Spartan back there. Additionally, because of the weird shape of the doors, the rear windows actually don't go all the way down. If you're like me, where you like to maybe rest your arm up on top, you can't do that because the window actually has about 2 to 3 inches of extra space. Aside from that, if you have a M Sport, or in this case, an M Performance car, you will also get the M Sport steering wheel as well as the M Sport seats. They give you a little bit more bolstering. I think it's a necessity, as the steering wheel is much, much better than the standard 4-spoke, as well as the seats. I have been plagued with sitting in too many base seats, and they just do not provide comfort for long distance. This has the upgraded Dakota leather, so it is real leather. Even though it's the lowest grade, it is still pretty high quality, very easy to upkeep. You can also get the Vaganza leather, which is a synthetic leather. It's still very soft touch and feels pretty good. It's just not real leather. So if you care about saving the environment and some cows, go for it. In terms of premium feel as well, again, this being a entry-level BMW, the main focus is the features and technology. While the main touch points still remain premium, the steering wheel being leather, climate control being metal, even having a gear shift knob is something premium in 2025. Everything else that you touch is a little bit scratchy, a little bit plasticky. This dashboard here has this kind of almost sticky-like material if it gets hot. It's very hard to explain, but the trim looks fine. It is plasticky, you know, around the gauge cluster, it's that same material. Scratches will show up over time. There's a little bit of gloss black here and there. It's really not prevalent. I think the main thing that you'll really be concerned with is just if you touch the screen or if you get dust on the screens. That's really where I'd see the most headaches come from, because they're angled in such a way that if the sun comes down, it's gonna reflect right back at you. And it's so funny to me that that's the exact angle that BMW engineers decided was optimal for driving. I think if they were barely a touch more forward, you would have no problems with glare, but I digress, I'm not an engineer. Other features that were optioned on this vehicle is the remote start and stop, which you can do from the comfort of your phone, as well as the key if you press the lock button 3 times. You've also got the credit card key if you want to, you know, leave your keys at home and only carry your wallet, or just your phone. You can also set up a digital key there. And if you have that option, you will also get the wireless charger, also known as the charger from hell. If you're doing CarPlay and you're trying to charge your phone, it will explode. Don't take my word for it, but your phone will thank you if you don't use that charger. Just stick with the USB-C or the 12-volt socket and you'll be totally fine. And one last thing for the interior is the sound system. If you go for the M235, you will get the Harmon Kardon as standard. Otherwise, you'll get the hi-fi system. I don't recall the exact specs on that one, but on the Harmon Kardon, you get 16 channel, 16 speakers, 464 watts, a little underpowered versus more of the larger sedans, which usually sit around 600 watts, if I recall. I keep all the sound profiles flat, and let's take a quick listen to that. Left foot on the brake, right foot on the gas. Oh, Jesus Christ. 60. Holy crap. Wow, that was a lot harsher than I thought. It actually gets up and going. I don't even think I saw the tire light flash on, the traction control. So, what does the mini-based 235 have to offer? Well, first and foremost, one of the biggest complaints that most people have when it comes to the F and the G generation in terms of handling is the steering feel. It's very, very dead and artificial. Putting it in sport just makes it worse. It's heavy, but artificially so. I can't get a good idea of what the wheels are doing. And especially in a car like this where the front wheels are doing everything. They're driving, they're steering, they're sending the power. I mean, it's just really, really tough to get a proper gauge of where the wheel is. That being said, everything else about the car is really good. Now, I'm not driving this car to the raggedy edge. I'm driving the speed limit. I'm figuring out what this car likes, what it doesn't like. Around these bends, it turns just fine. The biggest gripe I have, aside from the steering, is that the suspension is just too harsh. And you can see that in my mount here. It does not want to stay still. And so in sport mode, it feels like you're sacrificing a lot to just get a little bit in terms of performance. The tuning in the engine and the transmission are really, really good. You get a little bit of that brap, not like a DSG fart. With the amount of shake that I'm seeing from the camera, let's just put it in comfort. That's where you're going to be spending about 90% of your time now. And already I can see at least a little bit of improvement. Now, driving the car normally, you're going to get a normal driving feeling. I would say you have a touch more firmness and weight in the steering, like I mentioned. Now, I don't know if that's because it's front wheel drive or because it's M performance tuning. It drives normal. The suspension is a touch on the firm side, but not overly so in comfort mode. That turn-in was actually really, really good. But between 5 and 7/10 of your full driving, that's what you should expect. It's at that 8/10 and up that I start to worry. Are you gonna get a lot of torque steer, bump steer, understeer? There's a lot of unknowns about this chassis that I don't personally know in the driving characteristics of the car. But as we're chumming along on these fairly rough back roads, if you will, I really enjoy everything that BMW has put into this car. The 225 tires, I would say, are a touch too small. You could really get away with 235s, as do most hot hatches. 235, 40, 45, 18, that's a very, very common size, and it's super, super affordable, especially when you start to get into track tires. Now, these are run flats, and I can hear that. They're the Bridgestone Turanzas. I'm not a huge fan of them. And the only tires I really dislike more are Pirelli P0s. There's still plenty of tire. I would actually opt for the 18s in a car like this, solely for the sake that you're gonna be doing a lot more economical driving than performance. Now, that being said, they are technically an ultra high performance all season, and you really get a good feeling with the steering. It's pretty direct. It rolls over the bumps pretty easily. It's just in tandem with the sport suspension and the run flats where you start to feel the bumps are too much. The curves themselves are fine. The steering feels direct. And so as I'm driving it through a lot of these back roads that are a little bit twistier, that really only gives you a good idea of how the car drives when you're pushing it. Let's get this car up to highway speeds. That's where you're going to be spending a lot of your time anyways. And let's see in terms of efficiency and comfort how this car does. All right, getting up to these on-ramp speeds. Speed limit around here is 60, 65-ish. As I'm going up to speed, I'm around 50 right now. You can start to hear the road noise as well as the airspeed pickup. And one thing that's really, really prevalent with run flat tires is that sound impact from the wheels. I'm gonna give credit where credit is due. Seeing that this car has frameless windows, being of a coupe design, as well as a little bit more of a big front, the wind deflection is pretty good. You have a little bit around the seams, which is expected. Again, coming straight from that wheel well, there's sounds coming there. Going 60 miles an hour right now, I do have to increase my volume a touch. It is a little bit louder. Really, the majority of this car's competition are hatchbacks. I think the only true competitor to this car would be an Audi S3. Same horsepower, front wheel drive based all-wheel drive system, 4 doors, I mean, it's right there, 1-to-1 basically. The only difference is that this is more coupe shaped than it is sedan. Then you've got Mercedes, which I guess you could do the A-Class, but I don't think they have an A35 AMG. You could do a CLA 35, but then you get into hatchbacks. And then, so that's where you start to see a lot more of the competition being in the hatchback space. Volkswagen Golf R, GTI, GR Corolla. The list goes on for hot hatches giving you 300 horsepower, all-wheel drive. So where does this kind of line up? Do you want a sedan that sacrifices headspace but has a trunk instead of a hatch? It seems weird to be practical in some spaces and then impractical in others. You can't have a coupe and a hatchback. In terms of driving ergonomics, everything's great. I mentioned that this has a very familiar layout to me. If you're familiar with BMWs, everything is very driver focused. The infotainment and all the buttons are angled slightly towards the driver. All the controls that I would need are on the steering wheel. I mentioned the seats were made of Dakota leather, not the softest leather, but they bucket you very well. I like that they have the incorporated headrests. It's very Audi. My brother recently got an Audi B8.5 S5, and they have these very similar seats. So I like that familiarity, as well as the extendable thigh support, bolstering longer legs. iDrive 7 is super intuitive. I've got my driving information here. I've been doing about 25 miles to the gallon, and that's with pushing it, so expected. But Apple CarPlay is super, super easy. Screen is plenty bright. That's a comment I've had on a lot of recent screens. I feel like they're not bright enough, or they have a weird angle where the majority of the screen's brightness doesn't actually hit your face. But moving from the center and into the gauge cluster, I'm glad that they're keeping the speedometer and the RPMs very easy and clean to see. You can configure the gauge cluster quite well. Left side, I have the speed. Right side, I have my trip odometer. But you can also see things like the radio, Apple CarPlay directions, your mileage. I do explicitly recall when I first got in an iDrive 7 car, though, it did feel a little overwhelming. If you're familiar with the layout and you know what to look for, coolant temp, oil temp, stuff like that, you'll do fine. If you're coming from the analog gauge clusters of the F chassis and older vehicles, it will take some time to adjust just to make sure that you know where your fuel range is, you know, how to configure this to your liking. Again, that's par for the course for any new vehicle that you get into. Safety features, as I mentioned, are very typical for this time period for BMW. While it doesn't have cruise control lane keep, it does have lane keep for safety reasons. You know, if you're starting to bump the lanes, it'll pull you back in. If you're like me and you're not a huge fan of that, you can turn the steering intervention off, as well as adjust the sensitivity to vibrations, the forward collision, side collision. You can all adjust that within the menu here. So this is just before that time period where everything was sort of automated. You still have your stop start button here, so you can turn that off. Still turn off all the safety functions if you want. Traction control. That's why I like this generation so much. You still have control of the vehicle. In an age where optimization, automating, hybridization is super key with efficiency, it sort of feels at the end of that road before BMW had to start making some more sacrifices. So overall, I think this car has a lot to offer. If you don't want to pay M340, M440 pricing, I think this is a great car. I mean, in essence, you could get very similar performance with a 228 and a tune. Just downpipe and a tune it, bro. But then you miss out on the LSD. I don't think you can get the adaptive suspension in the 228. But plain and simple, if you want a sporty car that's economical and is gonna get you in the door of the brand that you like, go for it. I think with the prices of these coming down into the high 20s, it's a great point to start at. You can still get these CPO'd. Buy a 22, buy a 23, you'll get a couple years of warranty. Throw on an extended warranty, under 50,000 miles for basically 30 grand, not too shabby. So with that being said, let's get to some closing statements. So what is my verdict on this 2024 BMW M235i? In a vacuum, 300 horsepower, all-wheel drive, 4 doors, BMW name badge on it. It really is a recipe for success. In an age industry, and especially in the US, a market where size is everything. Big horsepower numbers, big torque figures, big space on the inside. I think in this instance, it's okay to be mini. And so on that note, I want to thank you guys so much for joining me today. As always, I'm your host, Donovan. Thank you so much for watching Eurofever Garage. And until next time, see you guys later.